The Big Four agenda has been on the lips of every civil servant, all the way from the sub-chiefs in the villages to the biggest office in the land, reflecting the importance regarded to the plan described as one at the center of the president's heart. In the next financial year's budget, 450.9 billion shillings has been allocated to the Big Four's drivers and enablers, with the universal health coverage pillar which seeks to ensure access to affordable health care by all Kenyans, receiving the biggest chunk of the budgetary allocations.
A healthy population is key in attainment of socio-economic development. It's for this reason that the government has prioritized universal health coverage. To support UHC, I have allocated 47.8 billion to activities and programs geared towards universal health coverage. Some of the specific intervention in this area include scaling up universal health coverage to the rest of the counties, NHIF cover for the elderly and severely disabled.
The drivers of the other pillars of food security, affordable housing and manufacturing were allocated 13.6 billion shillings, 17.8 and 4.9 billion shillings respectively. While this year's allocation to the Big Four is 12.5% higher than last year's, some legislators believe that the amount is way below the allocations needed to keep the dream alive.
No, it's not enough. That's 14% of the budget. The budget is 3 trillion. We are talking about 14% going to fund what you consider as more critical for the performance of the economy. Again, that is also laughable because we should have put at least 30% of resources on Big Four. We are lagging behind because if you look at universal health care, the 3 pilot counties, we have not been given the results of those pilot counties. Whether those pilot counties, what they have achieved and the success to allow us to reallocate more resources in the other counties.
With just 3 years and 2 national budgets before President Uhuru Kenyatta leaves office in 2022, many analysts believe that the Big Four dream may not be achieved within that time. Funding of the housing pillars ran into headwinds due to strong public opposition to the 1.5% housing levy that was meant to fund the plan to develop 500,000 affordable housing units by 2022. The collapse of the 7.2 billion shillings ambitious Galana Kulalu irrigation project has also dented the government's ambitions to bring more arable land into production. Victor Kiprop, NTV.
Treasury CS Henry Rotich also announced a raft of cost-cutting measures in his 2019-2020 budget statement, saying the government will adopt a policy of zero new projects until it completes the existing ones. If the statement is anything to go by, the government will see a cleansing of the inflated wage bill to weed out ghost workers in government departments. NTV's Zainab Ismail highlights some of those measures featured.
It's bad news for government officials as the state has announced measures to cut on travel allowances by exploring the use of an electronic card system for all public officers travelling within and outside the country.
This card would be preloaded with subsistence allowance to be expended by officers travelling on official duty on eligible expenditures only.
The CS said Cabinet is considering a new transport policy that will standardize fleet management and use of fuel cards. The policy will require all government vehicles to be procured only from local assembly plants. The CS further expressed concern about the increased pension budget that has shot up to 86 billion shillings, which he said was unacceptable.
We are on course towards providing an electronic end-to-end solution on all procurement processes. Mr. Speaker, these will significantly enhance efficiency, transparency and accountability in procurement.
And beginning next month, all government office spaces will be standardized by uniform cost leases and all existing leases renegotiated. The Cabinet Secretary told members of Parliament that a cleansing of the wage bill is being undertaken to out ghost workers.
We conducted a payroll cleansing exercise for pensioners and dependents at the Huduma centers across the country to authenticate the approximately 270,000 recipients of monthly pension paid by the government. We are finalizing the analysis and we expect cost savings. Pension management will also be improved with migration to IFMIS since last month.
It is not the first time that the government has put in place austerity measures in the budget. Similar pronouncements had been made in the past, with no tangible results seen. Last year, for instance, Rotich announced measures to freeze all non-essential spending to steer the economy back on the recovery path, words that were rubber-stamped by the head of state himself.
These budget cuts ask all of us in government that we tighten our belts. It also ensures that the sacrifices made by tax-compliant Kenyans are matched by discipline from all of us in the public service.
A few years back, Treasury issued a directive to phase out fuel guzzlers and replace them with Passats, a directive that was only implemented for a while. Today, it is back to the same old ways of fuel guzzlers for government officials. The government having a long history of not walking its talk. Zainabi Ismail, NTV.
Well, Kenyans will have to continue tightening their belts after the government failed to offer any kind of reprieve in the cost of basic food items such as bread, unga or milk in the 2019-2020 budget. The Treasury Cabinet Secretary has also raised the alarm over a looming maize shortage but offered no solution. But it was sweet tidings for coffee and sugarcane farmers, as Lillian Kiari reports.
At the beginning of the year, the cost of a 2-kilogram packet of maize flour, considered as Kenya's staple food, was retailing at 85 shillings. The same has increased by over 40 shillings to average at 125 shillings. And from the pronouncement by Treasury CS Henry Rotich today, the future seems bleak.
Yes, there is indications that we may not have enough maize going forward.
The government is betting on maize it had stocked up in its stores at the National Cereals and Produce Board. This is despite the quality of this maize being questioned by millers who have deemed it unsafe for both human consumption and as animal feed.
With unspent funds for this current financial year and proceeds from sale of maize from strategic reserves, the Strategic Food Reserve Trust Fund will have adequate funds to buy food reserves and intervene to support farmers in accessing inputs in a reformed arrangement in the coming financial year.
But given that many experts have reported that current maize stocks will run out this month, the 2019-2020 budget has not offered direction on what the country is going to do beginning July in terms of imports. This simply means that tougher days are approaching as the cost of unga is likely to increase further.
To that end,
but it was not all doom and gloom in the food budget.
in this budget, I have set aside $2 billion for the National Value Chain Support Program, $3 billion for setting up Coffee Cherry Revolving Fund to implement prioritized reforms in the coffee subsector. In the coming financial year, coffee farmers across the country will be able to access cherry advance at a modest interest rate of 3%.
The government has also allocated 700 million shillings to clear monies it owes to sugarcane farmers, 1 billion for crop diversification and to revitalize the miraa industry, and a further 800 million shillings for the rehabilitation of fish landing sites. The dairy sector has also received a boost with 0.7 billion shillings for smallholder dairy commercialization. Ongoing irrigation projects such as Bura and Moya have received an allocation of 7.9 billion shillings. With the cost of living having gone up to an average of 5.1% in the last 11 months and the unemployment rate hitting 7.4%, most Kenyans are barely getting by. The realization of food security has been shaken, with the government only allocating 2.53% of total voted expenditure on agriculture in the next financial year. This is down from 3.5% in the 2016-2017 financial year. Food Security Lobby Group, A Route to Food, has reacted to the government's spending plan, terming it irresponsive to the needs of Kenyans. Lillian Kiarie, NTV.
And still on budget matters, Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich has allocated a 19.2 billion shillings to agencies directly involved in the fight against corruption. In his proposals for the 2019-2020 financial year, the CS has allocated 2.9 billion shillings to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, 3 billion shillings to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, as Criminal Investigation Services get 7.1 billion shillings. Office of the Auditor General has secured 5.7 billion shillings, and additionally, the Financial Reporting Centre has been allocated 540 million shillings. The Assets and Recovery Agency has 50 million shillings set aside for it, while Unclaimed Assets Recovery Agency gets 149 million shillings. The CS said that to enhance the oversight and legislative role and access to justice, Parliament has been allocated 40.5 billion shillings, and Judiciary has been allocated 19.4 billion shillings. Treasury has once again recommended the repealing of the interest rate capping law, citing the negative impacts it has on the economy. As he read his speech yesterday, CS Rotich said Section 33B of the Banking Amendment Act was put in place to facilitate access to affordable credit, but has failed to do so. In order for this proposal to be implemented, it has to go through Parliament, where it might flop yet again because members of Parliament have previously indicated that they will not repeal the law.
I'm in this year's finance bill proposing a repeal of Section 33B of the Banking Act 2016. I'm convinced this will unlock credit to the private sector and in particular to the SMEs.
Well, as we still think through the budget that was just read out to us yesterday, 3 trillion budget by CS Rotich, of course, many people reacting to how it has affected them. And Dan Mwangi now joins us to help us along this road as even many stakeholders speak on the same. Dan?
Thank you very much, Gladys. And like you've correctly said, we're going to look into the budget and understand what some of these things mean. Some of them are in a bit of jargon, so to speak, so not everyone may understand exactly what they mean and the implications. And I shall be joining my guests in just a bit to be able to understand some of these things. But first, let's look at some of the winners and losers in regards to this, this budget, the 3 trillion shilling budget. So first and foremost, when we see on the winners now, manufacturers, because of the import declaration fee on immediate goods and raw materials, this has been brought from 2% down to 1.5%. That's a reduction. And so this is a plus for manufacturers. And we even had the CEO of the Association of Manufacturers in studio earlier this morning who expressed her delight at this kind of move by the National Treasury. Another winner we have in this budget that Rotich read yesterday is the manufacturers yet again, because they have of the import declaration fee on finished goods. Now it has moved from 2% to 3.5%, and this is another win for manufacturers. You can see why the manufacturers are really happy about this budget. And we'll be looking at some of the others, winners and losers as we go along in regards to, in our discussions. Some of them are what we call the Nduthi people, the border operators who are on the losing end of the budget, so to speak, because they're going to be likely to be paying more for the insurance policies. And so I'm just going to now move on to my guest who's in studio with me, just to give us some better context into this. Just to introduce Erastus Kwaka, who's the managing partner of Croy Erastus and Company. Thank you for joining us and for just giving us the opportunity to just engage on this. And first and foremost, on the overall, what is your general feeling and view about Rotich's budget?
It is pointed. Number one, Dan, I divide the national budget into 3 parts.
Okay.
Those other parts are mini parts. The 3 parts are what we will use to pay our debt. Number 2, what will be stolen. Number 3, what remains for everything else. And I can tell you that the budget, 3 point whatever it is, should actually be reading 1.8 around there, according to my arithmetic. Because if you take out the debt repayment, we have to get the money to pay it. Of course, some of it I know we'll borrow and so on. And then you take out what will be stolen. You actually remain with less than 2 trillion to deal with.
What amount are you attributing to what will be stolen? And what is your rationale behind that figure?
30%, because that has been bandied before, and nobody has ever challenged it empirically, that it is not 30%.
So 30% of the 3 trillion shillings, which is 900 billion shillings, is likely to be stolen.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we talk about some of the measures that Rotich took to see whether to see how he can raise revenue.
Right.
What's your feeling on this? Are these practical things or are they just good on paper?
Some are good on paper, but some are real. If you take the whole area of betting, alcohol, cigarettes, and some areas which are not very palatable, like the increase in capital gains tax to 12.5% from where it was, some of that will raise money. But as you look at some of the things like the property market is a bit slow at the moment, so you don't expect a lot of sales along those lines, even though some of the sales will be captured under other budget lines. So yes, some of it will work, but some of it, I'm afraid, done, will actually not work.
Such as which ones, for instance?
For example, when you talk of taxing boda, you and me know what is going to happen. They are going to say no, and I'm not telling them to say no, because I think they should be paying, by the way. Why our hospitals are packed by accident victims, and the majority of them, we know it, are from boda. Not that they're doing a bad business, but the numbers, and of course the carelessness on our roads, causes some of these things. So it is also right for the boda group to contribute to the national budget, and some of that then, of course, goes to take care of the health system. So that, I know, is likely to be resisted. Then you are talking about the lowering also of travel expenses for civil servants. I'm afraid some of them will find ways to get around it. And many other examples are done.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you speak about the boda, and this was when the CS mentioned about the insurance, that now if the boda guy has an accident, the insurance is going to cover his pillion passenger, right, as well as the pedestrian who may have gotten injured in this. And we spoke to some of the boda operators in various parts of the country just to understand their feeling and what they would like to know. And let's listen into some of their views just to get a sense of the situation as it stands from them. We'll run them in just a bit, but just in this context, because the NTSA statistics usually give us a picture of, they give us a picture of what exactly the number of people who've died, those who've been injured, the serious injuries, and I'm told we have the voices of the boda operators. Now let's listen in for just a bit first.
Sidhani kama naweza afford hiyo PSV ya kukatia mimi na abiria.
Ni kama serikali nataka kutuwekea ile sheria ngumu sana, kwa sababu watu wengi tunaendesha mapikipiki sa wenyewe.
Hiyo itakuwa ngumu sana kwa sababu mapato yetu kama sisi wana boda ni ngumu sana.
Anaona itakuwa mzuri zaidi kwa sababu sasa hivi tunapata, ukishapata ajali ni gari peke yake ndio inakuwa compensated.
Hiyo hatua itafinya madereva sana, kama itabidi tukatie hizo vitu.
Unajua passenger wengi most of the time wao bargain. Sasa ukiambia hata petrol ikipanda ukiambia tumeongeza fare, mara nyingi they complain. Inabidi anatafuta tuktuk nyingine.
Na serikali watukubalie tubebe watu wawili ili tuweze kurudisha hizo pesa zenye zitakuwa zinalipia hiyo insurance.
Wanamaliza vijana na wanataka waigirie kwa mambo yale maofu.
Rasas, you can hear them. Sorry, I mean, the sentiment. They say they cannot afford it.
Yeah.
They say they feel like it's additional pain in addition to the fact that fuel prices have been going up. what's your feeling when you listen to them speak that way?
In brief, it is a precursor to what is going to happen. And I think I need to rest my comment there.
Okay, because I'm looking at the accident statistics from the National Transport and Safety Authority. This is as at 20th May 2019. And the summary of fatalities shows that pedestrians 485, drivers 133, passengers 230, pillion passengers 124, motorcyclists 250. And this is an increment. For the largest increase actually is on motorcyclists. And pillion passengers actually is the highest, because the pillion passengers, when you compare with 2018, is a rise of 27.8%. Motorcyclists up by 11.61%. So you kind of see what has informed the decision.
Yeah, and that is very true. But also, I must add that those who do motorcycle things might also have a sense of betrayal, because when they were invited into this, it was all, motorcycles are, free of this, free of that, and we are promoting employment. So there is a sense that somebody can rightly feel that, why did you trick us into this? And then now you are catching us up on this. What needs to be done is a retraining and a much thorough justice system that makes sure that borders behave well. Because a lot of the accidents that happen is either the motorcyclist or the other side of things. And many of them, we have seen it even in Nairobi. If they cause an accident, they would rather negotiate with you and run away than go to the police. Why? Insurance, lack of PSV and whatever else they need, and even proper training. So those are elements that if you address those, you may not need to use the tax route to get them.
Okay. And when I look at, now moving on a bit from the border operators and now move still on the roads in regards to cars.
Right.
And in the Finance Bill 2019, and this, interestingly, the CS did not mention this in Parliament. He didn't, because he did not read the entire finance bill.
Right.
He said he was giving the highlights. And so one of the things that he then mentioned in the press briefing later on, which is in the finance bill, is about imported motor vehicles.
Right.
And it says, imported motor vehicles of cylinder capacity exceeding 1,500 cc, of tariff heading 87.02, 87.03, and 87.04 will have an excise duty of 25%, which is an increment.
Right.
Maybe just to unpack this for us, and there's also motor vehicles of tariff number, there's other tariff numbers there, which now goes to 35%. What exactly does this mean?
What it means is trying to discourage people from importing vehicles that would have higher consumption of fuel. And in a way also saying that if you can import it, you should be able to pay the tax. And that is not bad, by the way, because like in the area where it's increasing it from above 25%, 30% and so on, you are talking of the very large vehicles. And if I can afford that, I should not be able to say that I can't afford. Because I can afford that vehicle, I should be able to pay the tax. And you know what? Those who want big vehicles will always get them anyway, regardless of the cost. And that is why you have in this country, people packing them, 3, 4, 9 of them in the compound, doing nothing, but they have them.
Okay, and so this means that any car that is above 1,500 cc is going to cost more to import.
It's going to cost more to import, bring more money to the exchequer, but also slowly reduce the numbers that will be coming in.
Because he also put as one of his measures that government agencies should prioritize buying from those companies that are locally assembling.
Right.
And so we're moving, there seems to be a shift towards, again, pushing the agenda of, buy Kenya, build Kenya.
Right.
But the challenge here is in many cases, which I think you may have tried to address in some of the areas, that a lot of the things that are made locally, not only cars, but generally,
right,
are more expensive than what we get from outside. That's why you'll still find an influx of goods from outside coming in.
Right. The genesis of that done is in many places. Let me start with the bad one. That some of the arrangements that bring even parts in the country, are occupied by people who have the last word or have the know on how to manipulate the system. So things will be imported at their cost. Therefore, the assembler has no other option but to put the price at a certain level. Number two, the assembler has a captive market because the government says you have to buy it here. Therefore, they can play around with the prices. Number three, you don't have enough assemblers to create real competition in the market so that the laws of demand and supply can really have effect. So the prices will not follow the normal curve that we know in economics. For that reason, you will find that the prices will remain relatively high because you have a captive market with no competition, with no adequate competition that can sort out the pricing element.
Okay. Do you foresee this reducing the number of cars that Kenyans are buying? Or will it see, are we likely to see more of the smaller vehicles being bought?
I think the smaller vehicles, which you can already see, for example, in the taxi industry, you can see that the vehicles are beginning to get smaller because of the profit factor and the fuel factor. So you will begin to see less of the bigger as time goes by, more even of the electric cars coming in, because that then will start to mitigate the issue of expenditure and things like that. But the number of vehicles, it will take time, but slowly it could become, if the prices are right, more and more new, and of course then that in the long term will benefit the economy.
Because what you'll find many a Kenyans saying, at least those who are looking to buy a car, if you compare some of the vehicles that have been manufactured, not assembled locally. We have Volkswagen, which opened the plant in Thika and the likes. If you compare that to a car which has been imported, you find that it's cheaper to get the imported one. The argument has been, you'll have a brand new car. But for the person who's paying, I don't know the priority is on the brand new or just having a good car.
Just a good car.
Which is affordable.
Which is affordable. And again, the other element which is interesting, Dan, some years ago, a Peugeot, for example, was being assembled locally. But the problem is that with time, quality dropped. And so people, and I was in an organization that was buying vehicles for use for projects and so on. So we just said, okay, forget it. If what we buy locally is bringing in dust, is breaking down, this was never fixed properly, people then still resorted, and in our organization we resorted to still importing. And paying the damn thing, whatever it was, we paid and got a good vehicle that we were sure that for the next 5 years would not give us problems. So those are some of the issues we need to think about. That element of quality must never be compromised. The pricing should be seeing a downward trend. And if that happens, by the way, Kenya will become also an exporter of used vehicles to the neighboring countries. And that is good for the economy. It will create jobs, create forex and other things.
Okay, and let's move a bit to what has now come back, sin tax. And we are seeing that, the proposal, what the CS read is that in order to address there's a decline he talked about in terms the trend of excise revenues. He proposes to increase rates of excise duty on cigarettes, wines and spirits by 15%. So he said what this means is that, for instance, a 750 milliliter bottle of wine will have an excise duty of 136 shillings, which is 18 shillings more from the current rate. A duty of a bottle of whiskey will go up by 24 shillings, and that's for a 750 milliliter bottle again. And a packet of 20 cigarettes will increase by 8 shillings. And from all this sin tax, and you see also he's also gone at the betting. He says he's looking to raise 5 billion shillings from this sin tax. Do you think that's a realistic target for this kind of a measure?
I think it is realistic, and by the way, in my own thinking, you should be able to raise more from that area. Were it not for the well orchestrated sometimes leakages in revenue at various levels.
Yes.
Yeah, not just at KRA. I know people always blame KRA, but KRA is just one. But there are other levels at which revenue leakages take place. And because many of those things you have mentioned done are compulsive and addictive, people will still do them. People will still buy, and people will still drink themselves. Whether to life or to death is another animal. But because that will still happen, yes, he is able to raise that money from that source. But there, you know, whatever money you talk about, there has to be a protection. There has to be an iron wall for that revenue so that it doesn't leak again outside. And many times, by the way, it is not the raising of those rates which is the issue. It is the collection. It is the entire chain from the time of manufacturing to packaging to selling, and then the revenue coming back to the exchequer. That is what needs to be completely sealed. Well, it can't be 100%, I know, because of human nature, but at least substantially.
Okay.
And then you might not even need to raise the rates.
And now, does this, you know, on the betting end of it, where he says he proposes to introduce an excise duty on betting activities, that's 10% of the amount staked. What does this mean for the betting farm?
Right. The betting farms, one, let me talk now as an accountant.
Yes.
They will have to do better accounting. Because for every 100 shillings that somebody bets, I receive 110 as the owner of the shop, whatever. But I must know that 10 shillings, must go to the government. So there has to be very strict control. And KRA needs to think this through very carefully. Because, okay, if you do it through the mobile phone, sometimes you can capture it. And of course, there's a lot of talk about how do you capture everything which goes electronically.
Yes.
It's tricky. But there are systems, yes, which can capture that so that the 10% actually goes to the exchequer.
So,
but let me also add that for the one who bets, I don't know if there is a word called the better, that one there, he will part with more. But the drive and force behind the idea that I can win is always very heavy. Although, you know, a Kenyan mathematician told us a few years ago that one is more likely to be struck by lightning before he wins, but people will still bet. That I can tell you for free.
I mean, is there really a fiscal way of dealing with a social challenge?
Not quite, because remember that something like betting is sometimes like a pastime, something you do in the evening in the casino because you have nothing else to do. So from a social point of view, you will have to do many other things, but still the bettors will be there. So it's not something you can totally discourage, unless, of course, you have other systems which completely bans it. But it is so lucrative as a revenue earner. I don't see anybody saying you shouldn't do it, although I know there have been attempts to curtail advertising and things like that done.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I see the fact that, like you said, the better is worse off now.
Yeah.
And we are seeing, for instance, if you think about it, there's people who will choose to bet many times, as opposed to, say, put their money in Emma Kiba.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a more, you know, the more guaranteed.
Sure. Yes.
I mean, there seems to be a bigger problem here. That's the underlying one. That how much of policy can be done to, you know, to deal with this kind of a problem? Because it seems we're in a get-rich-quick kind of
mindset.
Yes.
Yeah. Then it is only one. Ban it.
But isn't it a big revenue earner? And you can see 3 trillion shillings is a lot of money.
You see, that is the weakness. That is the weakness that all systems of government have, and not just Kenya, but worldwide.
Yes.
That whenever the government gets an easy way of getting money, they will tend to perpetuate it. And many times, to use a very, very soft word, and I don't mean to be rude about this, in the pretense of controlling it. All the syntaxes have always been camouflaged and stated as to discourage this and to encourage this and to do all these nice things. But the truth is, it's a cheap way of revenue. So other than banning it, and of course then you reduce your expenditure by 3 billion, then you say, fine, I don't need that 3 billion.
So are you saying, in your view, we should do away with betting altogether?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, and so that you feel that is what is going to solve the problem, because where then would the government raise the money? I know they've been concerned that some of these betting firms have been avoiding tax.
Yeah.
But these billions that they actually bring to the exchequer, where would they be gotten from?
It's very easy. Yesterday I was in another media, again for East Park, and one of the proposals I gave, and I would like to give it here, done.
Yes.
We are withdrawing the 1,000 shilling notes.
Yes.
And we are telling people that if it is 5 million shillings, you go to the central bank, of course you fill a form, your name is taken, and of course you might be followed in future. My solution and suggestion to the government even today is simple. Take all the money that comes on a no questions basis. Deduct 40% because that money has not been in the economy. So it has deprived me and you, Dan, and my sisters and brothers out there of money. So get 40% of it, call it anything, tax, anything, to the economy. And my calculation is very simple. You will get about 240 billion shillings in revenue just from that. So if you like, there is the money. In fact, if you do that, we might not even have to borrow what we have put in the budget to borrow.
Okay.
There's money. And the figure I have comes from the fact that it has been stated, I don't know whether empirically or not, that the money we have out there is about 600 billion. So assuming some of it will not come back, even if you worked with only about 400 to 500 billion, that is where I get my 240 billion shillings. And you know, Dan, on the 2nd of October 2019, Dandora dump site will be full of some papers which were once upon a time called money. Because people will be stuffing them in buckets, waste paper, and putting them in gunias and putting them on lorries to go to Dandora. Why waste it there? Because children will be playing with them, take it in, ask no question. We know some of it, and a lot of it is from all sorts of sources done. We don't need to go very far. Get it into the economy so that 60%, that is my figure, remains for me who has taken back the money, and there you create money. Instead of it ending up in Dandora dump site.
What about the dynamic of justice? Because if it is money that has been illegitimately gotten,
right,
and it has denied Kenyans services,
right,
livelihoods, bread and butter,
right.
What about justice for those people? You will say no questions asked.
Right. Justice question is simple. If you try to prosecute those people, then you will go nowhere. You will have to prove how I got the money, because it is you accusing me. It is you to prove that I never got it right. And then we know the chain reaction which will happen. Some of our leaders will be threatened that we will vote you out. some will be told all sorts of things. Then all cases will clog up in court. It will take 100 years to go through the money cases, that I can assure you. So sometimes justice works in a different way, because you can say that if, for example, and remember 40% is just my suggestion, yes. That if you did that, then you are saying that the cause of justice has been fulfilled.
Okay. Now, and you've mentioned, we've alluded to corruption.
Yeah.
And in regard to the war on corruption,
right.
The CS allocated 2.9 billion shillings to the EACC. Same amount that was allocated in the current financial year. The ODPP got slightly more, which is 3 billion shillings from 2.9 billion shillings. There's the Asset Recovery Agency, which got 50 billion shillings, and there's the Unclaimed Financial Assets, which got about 149 million, I beg your pardon, not billion for the ARA. The Financial Reporting Center got 540 million. DCI got 7.1 billion, which is a few hundred millions higher than what it got in the current financial year. We see the Auditor General getting 5.7 billion shillings. And we have Parliament has gotten 40.5 billion and Judiciary 19.4 billion.
Right.
We've seen it's an increase in the funding of the war against corruption. Do you feel this was sufficient? Because some of the the budgets that had been requested may not have been met in regards to the expectation of the specific agencies. Do you feel this is enough resource being put into the fight against corruption?
I think it's a better trial, more particularly for the Auditor General, because the Auditor General before, despite all public denials, I can tell you for a fact, has and had been denied funds. And yet his report is key to many other things. The auditor's report is key to county government allocations. The auditor's report is key to informing those who need to take action, And the auditor's report is also good as a PR face for the nation, that this country is doing well, this country is actually looking after its money, and of course it is publicly reported. So this is a good attempt. What we have not seen, and forgive me if the statistics are there and I don't know, or we don't know, accountants, that what can you say has been achieved by allocations from last year? I know computers have been bought, some rooms have been partitioned, and a few vehicles have been bought. We keep reading about vehicles being bought by various agencies. But then, can we get the statistics of who has been charged, jailed? Not even the quiet negotiations that have been allowed to take place, that, okay, we can have a plea bargain. Nice words. But you know what Kenyans are looking for and looking at? Real action. The day you will lock up, in fact, about 10 or 20 of some of the figures that we know in the public, things will change.
Okay.
So what people are asking for, what has the money done? To tell us you have recovered so much is okay, but what have you done in terms of pinning down and nailing down the key players?
Which now brings us also to the fight between the executive and the judiciary, with the executive saying the judiciary is slowing down the process. The judiciary says the DPP, alongside the DCI, are not bringing watertight cases. So then that becomes a case where the judiciary cannot, go ahead to the point of concluding a case based on weak evidence.
Right.
And before we get into that just for a bit, I want us to cross over the county of Nakuru, where Bridget Ngana is standing by to also contribute to this with the people in the great county of Nakuru. Bridget, good morning. And what are the people of Nakuru saying in regards to Rotich's budget?
Well, it's a cool, cloudy morning here in Nakuru County, and it's the day after the budget was read yesterday. And so we're going to speak to the Wananchi on what they feel about the 3 trillion shilling budget. So we do understand that liquor taxes went up and also other things as far as the cost of life is concerned. So I'm just going to be speaking with the residents of Nakuru and to just help us understand what they feel and if at all this budget was for the Wananchi or it focused on the needs of the Wananchi. Karibu sana NTV. Utaanza majina yako na utuambie unahisi vipi kuhusu bajeti ambayo ilisomwa jana.
Kwa majina ni Benson Masharia ambaye ni mkazi wa hapa Nakuru. Kwanza kabisa tungependa kusema ya kwamba hii bajeti ambayo imekuwa kubwa katika historia ya Kenya, tumeweza kuona imeangazia masuala kadhaa ambayo sisi wenyewe tunaona ya kwamba labda kuna upande moja imetusaidia na upande mwingine imetufinya. Kwanza tungesema ya kwamba katika masuala ya ugatuzi tumeona hii almost 400 billion ambayo impelekwa katika counties kama pesa za ugatuzi. Tungesema ya kwamba hiyo pesa ilikuwa mzuri, lakini wangeongeza zaidi kwa sababu functions mingi ziko katika county. Lakini la kushangaza ni kwamba pesa nyingi ambazo wamewacha katika national government ambazo ni za recurrent expenditure almost 1 trillion, sisi kama wananchi tunaona haingeenda upande hiyo. Wangelete pesa mingi kwa masuala ya maendeleo.
Na sasa umeongea kuhusu recurrent expenditure. Kumekuwa na ile changamoto wakisema kuwa wafanyikazi ni wengi na pia kwa ugatuzi pia ilifanya pia wafanyikazi wako wengi zaidi. Unapendekeza ifanywe nini ndio tusikuwe tunatumia pesa nyingi ambazo tunaleta hapa nchini kulipa mishahara baada na kufanya maendeleo?
Kwanza kabisa kumekuwa na shida kwa sababu hapo awali kuna ripoti ambayo ilitolewa 2016 kuhusu wafanyikazi wa serikali ambao tungependa ya kwamba hiyo ripoti ilikuwa ishughulike staff rationalization, ambapo wangeweza kupunguza wafanyikazi wengine wapewe handshake kwa ile kwenda nyumbani ili kuweza kupunguza zile expenses za county na pia national government. Kwa hivyo serikali ingechukua hizo baada ya kuendelea kuandika watu na pia masuala ya utumizi wa fedha katika zile counties zetu. Tunaona ya kwamba wana overspend pesa katika masemina na masafari na vitu kama hizo. Kwa hivyo tungependa waweze kuangalia zile mbinu za kuweza kupunguza fedha katika kaunti zetu.
Asante sana kwa maoni yako. Now, one of the things that is also of concern was the judiciary. It was allocated some monies, and also that is also something that maybe people need to react to. And I'm going to be speaking with a lawyer. He's going to tell us what he feels about his reaction about the allocation to the judiciary as of yesterday's budget reading. What do you think about it? And can start by your name.
Thank you very much. My name is Kipkoech Bernard Ngetich, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a serving council member of the Law Society of Kenya. The judiciary was allocated a total of 18.4 billion yesterday or thereabouts against a budget of 3.3 trillion. This is about 0.5% of the entire budget compared to what was allocated to the executive arm of government, which is about 1.8 trillion, and 43 billion allocated to parliament. This is really very sad. This is a very sorry state of affairs, considering the judiciary has about 6,000 employees. The judiciary is recruiting about 11 judges of the Court of Appeal. The judiciary will shortly be recruiting another 20 judges for the Employment and Labor Relations Court, as well as the Environment and Land Court. Considering that the judiciary is very important for a vibrant economy in unlocking cases already filed in court, considering the judiciary also is very, very important in resolving disputes expeditiously and also collecting revenue, that is court fees, as well as court fines and determining criminal cases. This is really very sad for a country that is looking forward to digitization. This is very sad for a country that is looking forward to fast-tracking corruption cases. This is a slap on the judiciary, and I don't think as a country we're very serious in jump-starting the economy of this country.
The same judiciary has also been highlighted in terms of its misusing the resources allocated to it. We've seen some cars that were bought maybe by the judiciary going to waste after some time, and also the judiciary was also proposing a budgetary increment to just have them be bought for more cars, but we're seeing that you're still not satisfied with the amounts given to it. Don't you think that they're also not utilizing the resources that they are given?
Thank you very much. I think the status of a judicial officer, particularly judges of the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal and the High Court, Employment and Labor Relations Court, as well as the Environment and Land Court, is deserving of a decent vehicle. For example, a decent Passat or a 200cc Mercedes-Benz. So for me, it is a necessary tool for functioning as an officer, that is as a judge of this country, I do not think that having a decent vehicle is a luxury. That is why even cabinet secretaries, that is why members of parliament have almost similar facilities or loans for the same facilities. For me, vehicles are very necessary. But that is just one side of the coin. The other very important thing is that we need infrastructure. When you look at the country as of today, apart from Nairobi, where we have Milimani Law Courts, and Nakuru now, where we have upcoming modern buildings. When you go to places like Narok, when you go to places like Barnet, when you go to places like Eldoret, we are still using colonial infrastructure, outmoded buildings. That is another facet also. Remember, judicial officers in this country still write their proceedings by their hands. We are supposed to have automated typing and writing of proceedings so that we move faster as a country. And also add this to the fact that the judicial officers that we have in this country today are far less compared to the global expectations.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Maybe those were the sentiments of some of the judicial officers here. They're saying they're not satisfied because one of the challenges the judiciary is facing is that there's a shortage of public prosecutors. Most of the students of law school, once they graduate, they prefer going to private practice as opposed to serving the public. I know that the office of the DPP is also short-staffed because of that, because these are facts that they're talking about. So they do believe that that should have been considered. And also the Mwananchi feels that 1 trillion shillings just for recurrent expenditure is still not fair for the Mwananchi, who needs to see more development on the ground as opposed to just paying people within the government payroll. Done.
Thank you very much, Bridget Ngana, and the two gentlemen that you've spoken to. And Erastus and I were just listening in, and one of the things that he's talked about, I mean, considering he's a lawyer, maybe you can just quickly touch on the automation of the judiciary.
Right. That was an excellent contribution there from Nakuru. The automation of the judiciary is key. And of course, one of the countries that I am aware Kenya even studied was Israel, where the judges don't need to write anything by hand. You can take a few points. And also, the steno work, what the stenographers used to do, is taken over by a machine. And there is technology today in the world done that can not only listen even to Swahili and interpret it for you, but also English and give it to you in another language. So the judge leaves the court, he goes to his chamber, and all the proceedings are before him. What who said, what who did not say, and everything else that he needs. And that has got a key ingredient in the judicial or the justice system, the dispensing of justice. In that, court records will be more reliable, it will be faster, and of course, if it is faster and more accurate, justice will also become easier, cheaper, and faster to come by.
Okay, let's quickly touch on the turnover tax.
Yeah.
In regards to the budget, what are the implications of this?
The implication is that, one, traders will be paying 3% of the total amount of money they earn in a year to Kenya Revenue Authority. Now, fortunately, as it happened before, because this is not a new thing, it was there before, it was a first and final tax. It therefore meant that once you have paid that, you don't have to worry again. Now, the problem it is going to create, of course, you will begin to see KRA officers again walking around shops and easily everywhere, Kibuye, Market, Kisumu, Kikomba, and so on, asking you for your ETR machine, so that the total of what you have sold can be seen, and 3% going to the exchequer. And that is not bad, because once you have done it, then as a common person, you don't have to look for an auditor, it is final. Now, remember it has come because the presumptive tax, which was to happen this year, has failed. And of course, we need to admit that it has failed. It was supposed to be collected with a license. As I go get my license every year, I pay 15% of that as presumptive tax. Yes. It was to replace this. It has not worked because of many reasons, including complications with the county governments, who will be unable to transmit money to the exchequer. So yes, that is good.
Okay, and in closing, our final one is there was, the CS spoke about the VAT withholding.
Yes.
Which was brought down from 6% to 2%.
Right.
Now, maybe you could just explain for those who may not understand what this means, because some people are wondering, does this mean that VAT total goes down to 12% from 6%? Right. Because I've seen some of those sentiments, and just as a point of clarification and explanation, maybe you could just take us through that very briefly.
VAT remains at 16% where it was.
Yes.
What the minister was talking about was withholding VAT, which therefore means it is only entities that have been appointed by KRA as withholding VAT agents that will have to change the way they calculate what to withhold. Only. So if you have not been appointed a VAT agent, you have no problem. Okay. But I know that NGOs have been appointed, many companies have been appointed, the government system itself. It just means that if you have sold to me something which is worth 100 shillings, you will not take 6 shillings as before. You will now take 2 shillings and send that to the government. If you are a withholding agent, if you are not been appointed, you don't have to deal with that.
So what's the implication of that reduced remittance to government?
It means that me as a trader, if my 2% will have been deducted, it means that when I now make my return at the end of the month, I will take account of 2% of what I sold that has been deducted as my credit. It's as if I have paid VAT already in advance from the person who has been deducted. But remember, the person deducting it is somewhere else. I'm in Nairobi. The person deducting it is in Mombasa. The person in Mombasa needs to give that money to KRA through the PIN and ITax structure of KRA. Then it will come to my tax account. So when I make my return, I will now not pay tax of 16%, but I will pay 16 minus 2. That is what it means.
Okay, thank you very much. Erastus Kwaka, who's the managing partner of Crow Erastus and Co, and he's also part or a representative of the ISPAC, that's the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, for giving us some good insights. Thank you very much. At least now, those who may not have gotten a very clear picture of what Rotich was reading yesterday, and many times as a business journalist, we get a lot of feedback that there's a lot of jargon in this thing, just for people to understand, does that mean that ABC will happen, you know? Does the announcement of A mean that B happens? So thank you very much, Erastus, for speaking to us and coming on NTV today. And that's where we close this discussion. But on Sunday is the Day of the African Child, and we shall be having an interesting discussion after this break with Gladys Gachanja, where she'll be having some children in studio. And guess what? Some of them are going to read the news for you, where you can't wait to see that. My name is Dan Mwanga. Yourself a great mid-morning into afternoon. But after this short break, Gladys Gachanja joins us with the children and more people to discuss the issue with and the day.
Good morning. Thank you for staying with NTV today. My name is Gladys Gachanja, and yes, we have children in studio. And this is Omar Hamid, who is 15 years old. And the reason we have them in studio is because on Sunday, the 16th of June, will actually be the International Day for the Day of the African Child. And we'll get into the details of it right about now. Now, the 16th of June is marked internationally as the Day of the African Child. This day is observed every year since 1991 by the member states of the African Union and its partners to honor the memory of the 16th June 1976 student uprising in Soweto, South Africa.
The protest by black school children was against apartheid, inspired education, and were demanding to be taught in their own languages. This resulted to the public killing of the unarmed young protesters by police.
Well, this year's theme is also linked to the World Refugee Day, which will be celebrated on June the 20th, which is next Thursday. And according to UNICEF, approximately 1 out of every 4 children live in countries that are plagued by humanitarian crisis and resulting in rights violations such as lack of access to medical care, clean water and sanitation, nutrition, quality education, or protection.
The 2019 theme, Humanitarian Action in Africa, Children's Right First, has been set to reiterate the even midst of a humanitarian crisis. The children should be adequately protected.
That is true. Here now is a clip to illustrate the plight of the African child in Kenya. Okay, that clip is coming to us, but at this point, I think high five. Good job, good job. Well, let me just introduce right about now that Omar is actually a trained child journalist.
Yes, I am.
From Toto?
Toto News.
Okay, tell us more about Toto News.
Well, Toto News is like a young journalist children training that took place when we had closed school on April. Yeah, the 4th month.
Of this year?
Of this year, yeah. It was amazing. It was a really good training, actually. It taught us a lot, and I mean a lot of journalism. Yeah.
Okay, so apart from using the auto cue, what else did you learn?
We learned about media. We learned about the social media, how to identify fake news. Actually, there are a lot of fake news out there. Yeah, we learned about a lot. We learned about how to use a camera, actually. Yeah. I didn't actually know how to use a camera.
And now you do?
Yeah, now I do really well.
Okay, and clearly, by the way you're reading, you were a good student in class. And at this point, we play you that clip that shows the plight of the African child in the Kenyan context.
Yeah.
Kwenye eneo langu nimeshuhudia mafuriko yalianza mwaka jana, mwaka 2018 mwezi wa 3. Tulipokuwa tumejitayarisha kupanda mimea, maji ghafla maji yakaingia kidogo kidogo. Nilipofika mwezi wa 4 maji yalizidi mpaka yakafurika. Watu wa Red Cross wakaja wakatuambia tutoka tuende kwenye sehemu ambayo iko juu.
Ilikuwa jioni. Ilipofika asubuhi, maji yalikuwa yamefika karibu na nyumbani.
Mafuriko yamenathiri mimi kama mtoto. Wakati ambapo tulikuwa tunakuja shule, tulikuwa hatuwezi kuja shule kwa sababu maji yalikuwa yamefurika.
Tulikuwa tunatoka kwa shule, sasa tumetoka kwa shule, tukakuja, sasa tumefika nyumbani, tukarudi tukakaa, kasemekana watu askari wamefika Luwingila, kasemekana vita iko hapo, kasemekana haiwezi fika hapa. Sasa tumekaa kidogo, tukasikia marisasi, Waturkana akaenda akaiba, akachukua ng'ombe ya Samburu, askari akapigana nao mabunduki.
Juu side kulikuwa kumewaka kwote, tukapita na njia ya nyuma, tukatokea kwa barabara. Tukienda sasa kwa barabara tuko mimi, mama huyo mtoto a friend of my mom na yeye mwenyewe. Sasa nilikuwa na questions nyingi. Mamangu wako wapi? Brother wangu wako wapi? Sasa nilikuwa nadhani labda amechomekea kwa nyumba. Ndio sasa Yusuf akakuja akamwambia watu waende Ngei. Walikuwa nalala huko. Tukaenda Ngei. Tukalala huko. The following day watu wa World Vision na na Red Cross wakakuja wakaanza kutupikia chai asubuhi. Napata nightmare usiku, naota moto iko mbele yangu all the time.
Mimi naweza ambia watoto wa Afrika wasiishi maisha magumu, waishi maisha mazuri, waendelee waende shuleni.
A clip that clearly illustrates the plight of African child in the Kenyan context. And just to reiterate what we have mentioned earlier on with my co-anchor Omar, is that this year's theme is Humanitarian Action in Africa, Children's Rights First. Just listening to that clip, I think it now explains why we're focusing on humanitarian crisis, because it feels like one of those issues that you talk about on international media, but actually when you break it down, it's things that actually affect us on a day-to-day basis. Now, to have this conversation in studio, I have again Omar Hamid. He's 15 years old, and he attends which school?
I attend Jamhuri High School.
Karibu sana. Next to him is Mishire Ngai. He's 10 years old from Strathmore Primary School, and he's a trained child journalist too from Toto News. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Okay. And next to him is Frederick Mutinda, who is the Program Director, Catholic Relief Services. Thank you for your time. Caroline Sakwa, Gender Director, Shining Hope for Communities. We call it SHOFCO. And of course, Ivan Zolango, Project Officer at Plan International. Now, it is very clear that the theme of this year is humanitarian action in Africa, children's rights come first. I'll start with you, Ivan Zolango. Why is this so imperative, especially for the Kenyan context?
Thank you for the opportunity just to explain more. Today it's very key, especially to share plights of children and also the challenges that children are going through, especially in humanitarian action. Another aspect is also to share the gains that we've made, especially in Kenya. In Kenyan context, we have experienced a lot of humanitarian action emergencies, and especially children are at the core. If you look at the number of population being affected by emergencies and disasters in this country, children are really at the core. They're the majority that are being affected, and especially including children with special needs because of the circumstances that surrounding that operations and how we carry out our activities. A good example, you might, in most of our cases, you realize that children are not being given time to participate, also to contribute in emergency response and planning. How prepared are we? Do we engage children during emergency preparedness? How we prepare ourselves? Do we have platforms to engage children? How best are we doing communication? Especially I'm talking about messaging to children. And in preparation for even response of different sectors, how best are we also ensuring that not only giving assistance, but also ensuring that it's something that's also coming from children's contribution and listening to them, giving a platform to share, especially before and during operations. So children are also being affected. I can say children are being affected by disasters. And as much as sometimes they might not express themselves because of their capacities, at the same time because of the vulnerability. You know, our communities, if you look at back, children have been looked down upon. They don't have platforms. So those challenges, they normally face a lot of challenges, and also the risk itself is also like, it's a lot because of the breakdown of the systems. You normally children, we have protection systems that we normally have. We normally have child protection systems in those areas. But during emergencies and during disasters, these systems are normally broken down, leaving children vulnerable to different hazards and also being abused.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. That's a very good overview of the conversation today. And let's now contextualize it. And I will move on to you, Caroline. You work with communities in most of our slum areas in Nairobi. And when you talk about humanitarian disasters, we're talking about floods, we're talking about fires, we're talking about drought, we're talking about cholera outbreaks. I mean, the list goes on and on. And as Ivan says, the children are the most vulnerable. Paint the picture for us in the areas you work in.
Okay, for me, I work in the slum areas. We basically work in Kibera, Mathare, Mkuru, and Bangladesh, Mombasa. These are very big slums in Kenya. One of the major aspects, as we've said, floods affect slum areas because when it rains and there's heavy floods, we've realized like we've gotten cases of children dying because of the floods. They are being swept away by the heavy waters. In case of fire, we've found children have been displaced because of families. Maybe the houses are burned and children are displaced. And this increases the rate of abuses in the slum areas. Like you find the rate of abuse in the slum areas when these things happen becomes very high. We get a lot of cases of children being defiled, children being physically abused in the slums, and it's because of these natural disasters that happen around the slum areas. So looking at the slums, especially Kibera and Mathare, we work with children to ensure their safety is our first concern. We ensure we provide safety and protection to these children by providing safe environments like schools. We have community libraries where children can come and be rescued at some point. We have a gender department whereby we rescue children at every time of the hour, be it at night or be it during the day. We work with other partners to ensure the children are kept safe and rescued from all these disasters.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Now, Frederick, definitely as much as we look at the most vulnerable in the slum areas, the issues go beyond just that. We're talking about even the conflict areas of this country. We're talking about the cattle rustling, the different sorts of conflicts happening across the country. The children are still caught in the midst of it. How does that look like, and what has been put in place to ensure that children are protected?
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I really want to say that when I first saw this team, I was really excited, considering that one of the calls from the African Committee of Experts is not for the state parties just to look at the themes in isolation manner, but also to look at it as a process, building from one theme to the other. And if you saw the last theme, whereby it was also about children, no children that will be left behind in African development, the same children now we are talking about, because the idea might be when we start putting all the children in one box, we need to understand that as much as there is principle of non-discrimination, some children, like children in emergency context, humanitarian situation, will always need to get that specialized attention. And now talking about this, like Catholic Relief Services, and also we work closely with the partners, government being one of them, our major partners, and other local implementing partners, and just looking at areas like Nyanza region, whereby you find that many times when it comes to issues of during the political seasons, there is a lot of issues there in terms of clashes. And I've seen, in, for example, in one of those programs, and children who are beneficiaries in orphans and vulnerable program, who are receiving these services, and maybe because they are either affected or infected by HIV/AIDS, even at that time, because of the war, because of the clashes between different political divides, they cannot even access, for example, the much needed medical care and medical attention. Come to maybe areas of Nal, north arid areas, they're up there. You find because of maybe some of those inter-clans conflicts, at many times you'll find even children are not even considered in the discussions themselves, because you'll hear elders from this clan and this clan, they are going to mediate and talk, but rarely do we even see those conversations and people asking, what is happening to these children? So I think that is the context that we have found ourselves in, and I think it's high time now as government and as stakeholders just to ask ourselves what needs to be done and what needs to be put in place in this country. But I'm happy for the last 2 years, Department of Children's Services under the strategic intervention section, they have been working closely with stakeholders and also under guidance of UNICEF just to come up with child protection in emergency guidelines for Kenya. And I think the idea is to, how do we get a more coordinated approach? Because at many times you find that when children are in a humanitarian context, it needs a multi-sectorial intervention. Different arms of government, different people need to come up. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a coordinated approach, that also becomes very dangerous for children, because we all know, and I don't, sorry to say it, but also we have other people who even take advantage of the situation.
Yes.
We have heard of instances where because of drought, people are saying now people are going to get child laborers from those communities for them to be hired, others to be married, and that's also sometimes also child traffickers also they take advantage of the situation, because nobody accounts for these children. So I think it's high time now we have this conversation as a country and not talk only about the theme itself, but what we need to put in place. And also not to focus on what needs to happen before and what needs to happen after, what needs to happen at that specific moment, but also how are we dealing with the long-term impacts and long-term effects that will come up.
Sustainability. Okay, I think for the longest of time, children have always been looked at as an extension of the adult. So you will equip the adult and hope that the same will be imparted on the child, but really the child will follow suit, not necessarily being asked or to participate. And that's why we bring in the children in this conversation. I'll start with you, Mishire. When we talk about disasters like fire, floods, and water view, your parents probably have already been given the necessary training to evacuate or protect themselves when such a thing happens. In school, are you given that kind of training?
In school, I would say, first, I would like to say thank you for letting me get this opportunity. It's a very nice opportunity. I'd like to say, in school, I don't think we're given training like that. Though there are some places where they give you drills, like when that happens, you run out to it, nothing in your hand. If there's a bag you have with your lunch, you just leave it there and just completely run, and there are some systems. But I don't think they do that in school.
Okay, if now, we're in the rainy season, cold rainy season, if there was a flood situation and you needed to save your life, would you know what to do?
Yes, I would. I kind of would.
What would you do?
I would run out of the class, and I would warn my teacher and everyone. Then mostly I would think that the teacher would help us finish that situation. Yeah.
Okay, now Omar, you're definitely older in high school, and I don't know if the situation is different. Maybe in high school you're taught a little bit more in as far as what to do or what not to do in case of an emergency, because it could happen to anyone.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, it could. Yeah, I don't think we're actually warned. Yeah, we are not. We are in school. They don't actually train us on what to do when some situations like fire or floods come. But just in case if it does, I think children should also take their own initiative of knowing what to do when something like that happens. Like for me, if it happens, if it ever happens in our school that maybe there is something like floods it has just reached the school, I think what I would do is run to higher fields where floods can't really reach. And then after that, you'll get something like a cell phone or something where you can call for help, like the humanitarian settings, the people who come to help children out of maybe certain situations like fire, floods, and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, now you can hear they have a general scope of what to do, but clearly if something was to happen today, we know the older folk would probably have a better chance than the younger ones, because even after every disaster, when you're coming to do the rescue efforts, the children are the ones that are normally left behind. So even as we think about this, because we've dealt with issues like terrorism, most companies are taking it upon themselves to teach their employees or even churches, saying if this was to happen, because it's hit us everywhere in society, this is what you should do. What happens to the children?
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have not involved children so much, especially during emergency preparedness. How prepared our children are. Child participation in their protection is very key. Because during, just an example, what we have been doing at Plan International, in Marsabit, we were doing a mapping of hazards. So during, if you are doing mapping, especially what kind of risks around that place, in terms of maybe environmental risk, it can be drought, it can be flood. We should be involving children to know which area they should report to, which safe grounds. So they map, they understand the area very well, understand the risks that may be and the hazards in that environment. So involvement of children in preparedness, involvement, especially messaging, to know who should they contact, where should they move in case something happens. Unfortunately, even in our schools, if you look at fire points, some schools don't even have, to tell them that in case there's a break, maybe there's a fire outbreak, then they should move to a certain point. Unfortunately, that's what has been happening, especially in disasters. So most of children end up being the affected more than any other person. So I'm looking at a good example. I'm looking at the messaging aspect. If you look at the messaging that we normally do, because during emergencies, we normally have how we structure our messages to reach the communities and also reach different stakeholders. But unfortunately, we have never made these messages, tailor-made them for children to help them understand and internalize, and especially even children with the special needs. Because, you know, during messaging, maybe community awareness creation, or conducting maybe community awareness on maybe there's an alert on floods and other disasters. Normally we don't have maybe somebody doing interpretation, especially, or making those, looking at those messages that will go well with children, and even the approach on how we deliver those messages to those children. So in terms of preparedness, in terms of how we engage children, we need to maybe move to another level, because that is the reason why, good example, you have just talked about recruitment. If you look at what's happening in Mandera, just to give an example, a site of Banisa, children are the ones who have been affected by remnants of explosives, because they end up using those remnants, you know, those explosives to play. They don't even understand what they are touching, what are they interacting with. So, you know, in the fields, normally they are, you know, like last year, what happened last year, and even the other year, most of the children, especially those who are grazing, they ended up being killed. They ended up being victims of these remnants of explosives. Okay. So my take would be, how best are we preparing ourselves, especially in areas that we have explosives? We need to sensitize children and have a way of how we deliver the message to them. And areas that we have floods, we know we need to involve children in mapping of that area, understand which areas they should move to safe grounds during emergencies, especially during floods and the rest. So engagement of children is very key. And let me just talk about just the last point. If you look at the principle, good example, if you look at the principles and that guides child protection in emergencies, child participation is very key. Unfortunately, even our planning team, if you look at the national disaster management teams, that are different committees that normally plan for disasters and the rest, children aspects are not normally being included. So they look at how best, planning on how to distribute food, planning on how to maybe do evacuation, but not looking at other aspects, because even children that are being affected by psychosocial support, what we call PSS. So they need to be given psychosocial PSS. And another thing maybe we need to look at, there's another component which is normally very key. We call it PFA. That's a psychological first aid for children. Children are also being affected psychologically. So during emergencies, or even after emergencies, we need, even before, we need to train communities and even children as change agents of change, especially reaching other children to help in the provision of a PFA. That's a psychological first aid for children. It's a very simple thing that's not required training. So preparedness itself should not only include the stakeholders of government officers or other stakeholders, but also include children in the planning itself.
All right. Now, as we look at how to practically ensure that these children are equipped, different areas call for different measures, definitely depending on what you're dealing with. And I'll come back to you, Caroline. When you have children who have been taught to trust an adult to take them to safety, they would easily fall prey to any predators. So even as you do your training and sensitize the children in as far as protecting themselves is concerned, what are the do's and what are the don'ts to ensure that even as we are all scattering to save lives, that they do not fall in the wrong hands?
Yes, thank you for that. In our programs, we have different programs for the children, the girls, and also the boys. We do a lot of life skills training, whereby the children are taken through on the do's and the don'ts when it comes to any kind of an emergency. So they are trained on life skills, like if you realize something is happening to you or a fire has broken out or something, do this, follow a teacher or follow a child caseworker that you know, that you know this person. Like, don't follow a stranger, follow a person that you know, and if you don't know that person, run to the nearest adult who you feel comfortable and trustworthy that you can get help from. So with the life skills we are doing and the mentorship program we are doing in our girls' schools, in the academies we are running, and in our child protection programs in the gender department and our Shofco Urban Network, they are facilitators who are trusted community members who are trained to ensure that every time there is something that has happened, like a disaster, they need to come up and support the children and help the children, give the children help. So the children are also trained on how to identify a trusted adult, and also in case of anything that they feel uncomfortable with a specific adult, they're supposed to report that either to their teacher or a counselor or a social worker or a caseworker who is available within the vicinity of the office. And also we also train the children on how they could identify places to go when they feel unsafe. Like we have safe community libraries where a child will go there and stay there until 8 p.m. and we have staffs working there who can take a child to their home if the child is not feeling safe. We have teachers who are trained to be with the children during life skills training. So these are a number of like young youth between the age of 20 to 30 years of age who come in every day after school between 3 and 4 to work with these children, in the academies, in our school academies and in the community, to ensure that they provide these skills to the children and also provide the places where they can go for help. And also within the communities that we are working with, we are trying to ensure that the community understands what we are doing in terms of child protection and ensure they are part of our programs in terms of, like for example, 2 days ago there was a fire disaster in Katokera village in Kibera, and as you saw the photos, most of the people who are rescuing and pouring water, trying to put off the fire, were community members supported by our staffs. So it means the community already has ownership of how to protect the children and how to protect the community. So they become part and parcel of ensuring there's safety in that community. So those are some of the initiatives we use in the community to ensure children are safe.
Okay. Now, Frederick, what Caroline is talking about to an extent sounds very controlled. It's something that has been put up and it works. Let's push to areas of this country where such setups are not there. And if we have that picture of the boy that's herding cattle, if we can put that up so that you understand some of the extremities we're talking about, because desperate times call for desperate measures. You see, that's a child who is actually washing their face using the urine of a cow because he's dirty, he needs it, and he's okay. That means he does not have access to basic water. Yeah. Sanitation is something else that puts children in vulnerable situation. And the reason why I'm bringing this up again, desperate measures, I mean, times call for desperate measures. You will find children that probably are in such a bad place. They are alone, they're not attended to, they are hungry because of drought or because they've been displaced because of conflict and all that. Who caters for these children and how should their rights be focused on?
Thank you so much for that question, Gladys, because I just want to link that with this year's national celebration for the Day of African Child. And if you see last week and this week, there are two major events that have happened, and both of them, they have happened in two different parts of this country, but all of them are facing similar situation. The launch for the Day of African Child was on 7th, and that was in West Pokot. And then we are going to have on Sunday, we are going to have the National Day of African Child celebration in Hola. And actually both the two areas, that picture clearly shows that is the kind of situation that is there. But now the question comes in, when we go now to the ground, because when you talk about the urban setup, it's very clear because you might have several organizations. People have access to information, they know what to do, they can listen from radio, social media. Unfortunately, that boy who is in Hola will never get a chance to maybe even maybe they have never seen a phone. They don't know what to do when it comes to this situation. So I think one of the things that I do believe, and also CRS, and also I know many organizations do believe in, is the principle of subsidiary. And whereby it is the people who are affected by the problem who can come up with the best solution on how to address that's a problem. But now the question begs, do they have enough resources? And resources, I'm not talking about financial resources. I'm talking about technical support and financial support, just to be able for them to think about what are some of the community mechanisms that can be put in place to be able to first respond and address some of these things when they come. Currently now in Kenya, we have an opportunity to see how can the local resources that are going to the county government, how can they be tapped to support some of these initiatives. But now the question comes in, how are they integrated in the CIDPs, for example? But we know different organizations, civil society, like Plan, World Vision, CRS have always been the ground, but I know so the government is somehow trying. But the question of we don't have funds always comes in. But I think it needs more of community intervention just to define some community structures that will be able to respond and address this.
Okay, remember the conversation today is the Day of the African Child. This will be actually marked on the 16th of June, which is this coming Sunday. And the children are at the center of this conversation, even as we focus on that theme of the year, which is humanitarian action in African children rights first. Now we cross over to Nakuru County. If you do remember, some time back, there was some stray children that had actually been picked up from Nakuru County and dumped in a different county. And this raised a lot of eyebrows in as far as how we treat children, whether or not they have parents or they do not have parents. My colleague Bridget Nganda now joins us with a perspective from Nakuru County.
So we are here in Nakuru County to celebrate the Day of the African Child. It's an international day, a UN-marked day for that matter. And every year, Nakuru County does take part in these celebrations. They are being celebrated in all the 47 counties, and it's the national government that is actually sponsoring these celebrations here in Nakuru County. We are at the Menengai Social Hall, and behind me is where the celebration is supposed to take place. Still, the program has not yet begun, but Nakuru has enjoyed some limelight, negatively for that matter, on how it treats its children, and specifically the street families and street children. We do know some months back we were infamous for shipping the street families from Nakuru and throwing them within a forested area in Baringo County. They were then returned back to Nakuru County, and this is something the county government has kept under wraps and has decided not to talk about it, apart from just saying they're still investigating the matter. The officials who are responsible for that issue had never been maybe investigated. We have not seen or heard of any stern action being taken against them. But to discuss the Day of the African Child, we're going to talk about the legal aspect of how to protect the rights of children. This is still something that news just in today also. A newborn child was collected from a pit latrine in some parts, the informal areas of Nakuru County, but that's a story we're going to follow up. But we're going to talk to a lawyer also. I grabbed him from my morning session. Thank you so much, rather, sorry for that. Just tell us, in terms of the rights of the African child, where are we as a country in protecting our children?
Thank you very much, Bridget Ngana. I must say that as a country, we have made baby steps. We're probably doing about 35% as a country in terms of protecting the African child. We have a very robust constitution which has enshrined very good rights for children. We have a very pragmatic Children's Act of 2001 which has come out very strongly to circumscribe rights of the children. We even have the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Kenya is a signatory to that convention. But when it comes to practice, when it comes to realization of these rights, we've not done very well. To start with is Article 43 of the Constitution, which generally grants the right to education to every Kenyan. More specifically is Article 53 of the Constitution, which says that every child in this country, and I want to speak about the children who are in conflict with the law in this country, every child who has been taken to court or who has a case is not supposed to be detained unless it is a matter of last resort. It got to be a matter of last resort for a child to be detained. Otherwise, he should not be detained. But when you go to our courts on a daily basis, a lot of our children are being detained. A lot of our children are in our remand homes. A lot of our children are treated like adults. Yet the same constitution says where they are detained, it should be for the very shortest time possible. Where these children are detained, they should not be mixed with adults. They should be detained differently.
Can you give us statistics in terms of the juvenile cases that we are still handling and why the legal process is so unfair to those who have been found on the wrong side and they are underage?
Thank you very much. I think as a country, generally, we are not a responsible country. The citizenry of this country doesn't care much about children. Having served as the chair of the Rift Valley Law Society, under which we ran the Justice for Children program, I would tell you we have hundreds of cases of children cases who are in need of maintenance, hundreds of cases of children who are in conflict with the law, hundreds of cases of children who do not have legal representation. The missing link in this country, of course, is we've not activated the legal aid assistance program, which is though an act of parliament, has not been activated. Children do not have an automatic right to be represented by lawyers. What courts have been doing across the country is to request lawyers. Sporadically, that is just when a matter appears and there's a child that needs to be defended, a magistrate would request you, kindly please represent this child. Otherwise,
Do we have special institutions for these children, or they are being forced to be incarcerated with adults?
Thank you very much. We have coming up. The government is coming up with institutions for incarceration of these children, but the capacity is far much below what should have been expected. So we do not have, really speaking, sufficient capacity to incarcerate or to detain these children who are in conflict with the law.
Final recommendations, maybe.
Thank you very much. I think what we need to do as a country is to review the law. The Ministry of Interior and Coordination, or to put in place mechanisms, and I think lawyers in the country and also human rights organizations should push the government to enforce Article 53 of the Constitution of the country.
Okay, thank you so much. That is one of the lawyers or legal minds in this county, rather. He is a constitutional lawyer for that matter and has even worked or represented this region in the Law Society of Kenya. But Gladys, you have heard that we do have a crisis as far as children who are in conflict with the law are concerned, and they do hope, and he's hoping that the government will review Article 53 of the Constitution that will protect the children who are found to be on the wrong side of the law, be it in representation and also in terms of their care while they are in remand. Gladys.
Thank you, Bridget Sangana. A very concise overview of the legal process and how children are actually handled on the same. And of course, just talking about Nakuru County, she also touched on the fact that those street children were rounded up in Nakuru, taken to somewhere in the nearby county, and everyone was up in arms saying even if they're street children, they still have rights. They are human beings. And I'll come to you, Mishira, just listening to what they're saying, and of course, just looking around Nairobi. You see the street kids. They look like you. It's just that they don't have some of the privileges you have. If you were put on a podium, and this is what I'm doing right now, what would you want society to do and how to treat these children?
Okay. What I would like society to do is like help those children. I mean, they also have privileges like us. They live like us. They have the rights for children like us. I mean, we're all children. So they should have at least to be treated nicely. Like, I would like the governor to donate some money to them. Like the budget that happened, it was very nice. I liked the way they gave the education 55.7 billion, and they gave the children who are orphans, they gave them 7.9 billion. So I liked the way they did that. I mean, I felt very nice for those people. I thought that they would like give the street children. I felt very nice of what they did because those street children, they have no privileges like us. They just sit down. Like, if I meet a street child right now, he'll say the last time he or she has eaten anything was maybe yesterday, and maybe it was the morning, and they haven't had anything. And when they go home and they haven't brought anything, maybe their parents will beat them. Or maybe for an orphan, they'll just stay hungry, and many of them will die. So I would like the society to help those children. I mean, they also need to be treated like us, even if they don't have, some of them don't have parents, or their parents don't use the money nicely. Like, I know some children, I know some street children are treated so badly. The money that they gain from borrowing on the street all day, just almost getting hit by a car, the parents just take it and go and buy their alcohol, and they don't care about the children. They don't do anything to them. So sometimes the children might run away, or they might take some money and use them themselves to buy food. So I would like the society to help those children.
Okay, very well said. Omar, when you see that child coming to you, he's sniffing glue, he's cold, we're in the cold season, he's trying to survive and all that, and people are just pushing him away, what comes to mind and what would you wish for them?
Wow. When I see like a child is coming to me in that situation, the best thing I would do is try and help that child. Actually, he's a child, or he or she is a child. They're supposed to be helped just like us. They're still human beings. They have the rights that we also have. It's just that maybe the privileges that we have, like technology and all that, maybe they don't have it. But they also need to be included in all the children's rights. They should be helped. Like me, if a child comes to me in that situation, I know I can't help him a lot, but I'll try my best to try and help that child.
So you see him for who he is as a child, not the
Yeah.
situation he's
Not
in.
the situation he is in.
And that's how we should look at all children. Well, even as we wrap up this conversation, I'll start with you, Evans. We have said there are many gaps in the system that have left our children vulnerable. Going forward, what should we tweak and tighten up to ensure that we don't fall, we don't let the children fall through the cracks?
Thank you. Going forward, what we need to do and what we have been doing at Plan International, which I believe should be scaled up because there are best practices that I've interacted with. A good example, we should involve children in emergency preparedness and emergency planning. At the same time, also ensuring that we look at aspect of even after emergency, having children as agents of change. Second thing that we need to do is that, if possible, I'm looking at how best should we ensure coordination of the systems and look at different sectors, because during emergency response we normally have different coordination bodies, but if we can have maybe the WASH team, water and sanitation, hygiene comes in, health team comes in, so there's proper coordination of different sectors moving forward. We need to improve on that. Shouldn't we also have one of the rescue teams focusing on the children? They're the ones who go in essentially to get those children. Yes, that's a key point, because for the system itself, because during emergencies we normally have different people responding differently, but children are never people are normally not focusing directly on children. So if you can have a team trained, well trained, especially like a surge team that will well trained to respond to plights and also respond to children needs at that particular time, because during even after emergencies or during emergencies, normally children, they also have their needs that we have to listen to them. A good example, provision, what we have been doing, provision of dignity kits. Plan has been providing dignity kits to girls. At that particular point, already the systems are broken down. They might not even get access to what they had before. Yes. So at that, we need to also listen to them and have a team, like a surge team, that will be directly linked and look at the plights and also the needs of children at that particular time. Okay. Yes. All right. For you, Caroline, even as you implement what you're doing in the slum areas, your clarion call to stakeholders, and especially the county government and the national government, in as far as enabling you and many other stakeholders who are literally taking this upon themselves to ensure safety and protection of the children's rights.
There's a lot of coordination going on in terms of actors like civil societies and the government. Children's Department to work together to ensure the safety of the children. We are sitting down with a group of civil society to review violence against children kind of strategy plan to ensure children are safe at all costs. So a lot of coordination, a lot of networking, a lot of putting resources together to ensure our children come first, and we're fighting for the rights of the children. It will be very important.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And Frederick, of course, we're talking about the country at large. Children are all over this country, yes, and their rights are violated one way or another, depending on where they are. To your clarion call.
I think I just want to go back to something that you said earlier when you say that children are like an extension. But I think also I want to say that also sometimes we treat children as an appendix. Because when you have appendix, sometimes you don't read if you can get the information there. But I know there have been a lot of efforts as a country to try and really put also children first. And I'm happy because now we are seeing even children joining us in this panel. But I think what we really need to do is that we really need now to align the humanitarian context with the current government policy statements. That lawyer there mentioned about something, how government can really invest in the judicial process to ensure that children are not necessarily being remanded and placed in this institution. It is in line with the government policy currently now, whereby Kenya is moving from institutionalization of children towards family-based care. But again, talking about street children, when they are rounded off, where are they taken? We find they are taken to this shelter. And I think at Catholic Relief Services, I am the program director for a program called Changing the Way We Care, which is also supporting the government and different stakeholders to see how do we transition as a country from when we have humanitarian, when we are in an humanitarian context, how do we ensure that we are not removing these children and separating them from their families and placing them in institutions and where they are forgotten and they never receive these services. I think we really need to think broadly and be very strategic on the aftermath of that humanitarian situation as a country.
Very well said. We've been speaking to Evan Solango, Project Officer, Plan International, Frederick Mutinda, Program Director, Catholic Relief Services, Caroline Sako, Gender Director, Shining Hope for Communities, that is Shofco School. And of course, our children in studio, Omar Hamid, 15 years old from Jamhuri High School, and Mishirengai, who is 10 years old from Strathmore Primary School. Before we close the program, I'd like Mishire to look into the auto cue, that's camera 7 there, and read for us what's on there.
You have been watching NTV today with Gladys, Gachanja, and I, Mishirengai. We have been talking about the Day of the African Child, which is celebrated every year on the 16th of June. Next up is NTV Sasa. Keep it NTV. Bye.
Well done, well done, well done.
This is NTV. In your paper this week, United Nations diplomatic tiff. Somalia offers oil blocks for auction, but there is a problem. They are in Kenya's territory. Not yet dawn. Civilians in South Sudan may wait longer after the military suspended talks and went rogue on protesters, killing some, injuring others. Thawing of relations. Tanzania, Kenya work towards resolving